Hey, have you ever wondered about the history of Alberta, especially the Indigenous peoples who have lived there for centuries?
Absolutely. Alberta has such a rich and diverse history. Let's dive into it.
Great! So, let's start from the very beginning. Indigenous peoples have inhabited the region now known as Alberta for thousands of years. One of the most prominent indigenous groups in Alberta is the Cree, who have a deep-rooted history in the region. They were skilled hunters and gatherers, and had a unique understanding of the land.
The Cree indeed played a significant role in shaping the history of Alberta. And don't forget about the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Dene, and Piikani nations. They have lived in the southern part of the province for generations. Their nomadic lifestyle and dependence on buffalo hunting were central to their culture.
That's right, the Blackfoot Confederacy was a powerful force in the region. The buffalo was essential to their way of life, providing food, clothing, and shelter. But let's also acknowledge the Dene people in the northern part of Alberta. They are Athabascan-speaking indigenous people who have been living in the boreal forests and tundra regions for centuries.
Absolutely. The Dene have a distinct culture and history in Alberta's north. It's fascinating how each indigenous group had its own unique way of life and traditions that were closely tied to the land. Speaking of traditions, have you heard about the indigenous spiritual practices and ceremonies that were integral to their cultures?
Yes, indigenous spirituality is a crucial aspect of their history. Many indigenous peoples in Alberta have rich oral traditions that pass down stories, legends, and spiritual teachings. Sweat lodges, sun dances, and pipe ceremonies are just a few examples of their sacred rituals.
These ceremonies are deeply connected to the land and the environment. The spiritual connection to nature and the land is a common thread among indigenous cultures in Alberta. It's also worth noting the importance of elders in preserving and passing down these traditions to younger generations.
Absolutely. Elders are the keepers of knowledge and wisdom. They play a crucial role in maintaining the cultural continuity of indigenous communities in Alberta. Now, let's shift our focus to the arrival of Europeans in the region.
Ah, yes, the arrival of Europeans brought significant changes to Alberta's history. In the late 18th century, explorers and fur traders from Europe began to venture into the area. The Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company were among the first to establish trading posts.
That's right, and this marked the beginning of the fur trade era in Alberta. The fur trade had a profound impact on both indigenous peoples and European settlers. It led to the development of trading networks, the exchange of goods, and the introduction of European technologies and diseases.
It's important to note that these interactions were not always peaceful. There were conflicts and tensions between indigenous peoples and European fur traders. The competition between the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company, known as the fur trade rivalry, also had repercussions in the region.
Absolutely, and these conflicts eventually led to the merger of the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company in 1821. This merger marked a turning point in the fur trade and had implications for Alberta's history. The newly formed Hudson's Bay Company continued to dominate the fur trade in the region.
The fur trade was such a crucial part of Alberta's history, and it played a significant role in shaping the economic and social landscape of the region. It also led to increased exploration and mapping of the area, which paved the way for further European settlement.
Yes, and speaking of settlement, the mid-19th century saw a wave of settlers moving into Alberta. The signing of the Oregon Treaty in 1846 and the subsequent influx of American settlers contributed to the changing demographics of the region.
American settlers were drawn to Alberta by the promise of fertile land and economic opportunities. This led to the establishment of agricultural communities, especially in southern Alberta. The arrival of the Canadian Pacific Railway in the late 19th century further facilitated settlement and trade in the region.
The railway indeed played a pivotal role in Alberta's history. It connected the province to the rest of Canada and opened up new markets for agricultural products. But it's important to acknowledge that this rapid European settlement had significant implications for indigenous peoples.
Absolutely. The encroachment of European settlers on indigenous lands led to conflicts and the displacement of indigenous communities. The signing of treaties between the Canadian government and indigenous nations, like Treaty 7 in southern Alberta, attempted to address some of these issues, but it was a complex process with lasting consequences.
The signing of treaties is a critical part of Alberta's history, as it marked the formal recognition of Indigenous rights and the establishment of reserve lands. However, it's also important to recognize that these treaties were not always fully honored, and many Indigenous peoples faced challenges in maintaining their traditional way of life.
That's a crucial point. The history of Alberta, like much of North America, is marked by a complex relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian government. The effects of colonial policies, such as the residential school system and the Indian Act, had a profound and often negative impact on Indigenous communities.
Absolutely. The legacy of these policies continues to be felt today, and reconciliation efforts are ongoing. It's essential for us to acknowledge this painful history and work towards a more just and equitable future for all residents of Alberta.
Well said. Alberta's history is a complex tapestry of Indigenous cultures, European exploration and settlement, economic development, and the ongoing struggle for Indigenous rights and recognition. It's a story that continues to evolve, and it's crucial for us to continue learning and respecting the diverse cultures and histories that make up this remarkable province.